There are stories that we remember not because of the shock or the revenge, but because of how a person chose wisdom over anger. Today's story begins at the Dallas airport, among hundreds of people bustling to get ready for a business flight to Seattle. A black woman, neatly dressed, carrying a small suitcase and a shiny CEO card, stood silently in the crowd. Little did anyone know that, in a matter of minutes, she would be at the center of an incident that would change the entire American airline industry. Her name was Dr. Maya Coleman, the new CEO of a multi-million-dollar aerospace technology company. But that day, no one saw her position. They saw only her skin color and concluded that she couldn't be in first class. Just 9 minutes later, the tables were turned. The despised woman had held the entire flight crew accountable and forced the largest airline in the United States to change. A story of dignity, wisdom, and justice, where the underdog turns out to be the one with the power. Don't look away, because this journey will make you believe that how we respond to injustice is what defines our true worth. If you believe in the power of calm and justice, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to start this story with us. The sounds of Dallas Airport echoed between the loudspeakers and the wheels of suitcases on the polished stone floor. In the midst of the hustle and bustle, Dr. Maya Coleman stood still. The light from the glass ceiling reflected off the glittering CEO badge around her neck, a small detail, but enough to make everything around her stop. She said, her voice even and cold as if she were pronouncing a sentence from this moment on. This entire flight crew is terminated. No one understood what had just happened. Only the loudspeaker announced, CSA Flight 2475 from Dallas to Seattle has landed safely. The imaginary camera lingered on Maya's face, calm, not angry, not gloating. Then, cut back to 9 minutes ago. The morning in Dallas opened with sunlight streaming through the windows of her high-rise apartment. Maya, 38, woke before dawn. She wore a navy blue suit with a white collar and buttoned up neat, professional, without a single detail to spare. A steaming mug of black coffee was on the table. Next to her was a laptop with a presentation open Continental Star Airlines partnership, $300 integration proposal. The phone vibrated. On the screen was the name Mom. Have you taken your medicine? The mother's weak voice rang out. Yes, don't worry. I just went to a meeting, Maya replied softly. In that moment, two worlds were clearly seen. A Maya of numbers, contracts, and power, and a Maya of care, of responsibility to her elderly mother, who depended on her. She looked up at the picture of her late father on the wall, Harold Coleman, a famous civil rights lawyer of the 1980s. His words seemed to echo in the room. You have to be twice as good, just to be seen as half as good. Maya nodded slightly. She knew that today. Every step she took, every glance she received would be scrutinized. As a woman, as a person of color, as the first non-white CEO of an American airline, a position that many thought she was just chosen to look good on her resume. She shut down her laptop and folded her gray coat. Instead of calling a private car like other CEOs, Maya chose to take the train to the airport, not because she wanted to save money, but because she needed time to organize her thoughts. The train window reflected her image, calm, focused, as if the outside world could not penetrate through the glass. The phone rang with a new message from the communications department. The press release announcing the CEO's identity will be out tomorrow morning at the Seattle conference. Today, CSA doesn't know who she is. Maya smiled, a thin, almost emotionless smile. She liked it. Being able to walk through the crowd like a normal person, no title, just a woman on her way to work. But she did not know that this temporary anonymity would usher in the most terrifying 9 minutes of her career. When the train stopped at Dallas International Airport, Maya stepped off the train amid the throngs of people. She walked past the signs, her steps sure. Her suit jacket was crisp, her hair was neatly tied, her briefcase was compact, the walk of someone who knew where she was and where she needed to go. However, as she approached the TSA security checkpoint, a young male agent suddenly raised his hand. "Ma'am, please move to the random inspection lane." She looked up. The line in front of her, 3 white men in suits, had passed smoothly. No one called back. It all felt natural, logical, too logical. Maya said nothing. She simply set her suitcase on the conveyor belt, took off her shoes, and looked straight into the scanner. No reaction, no challenging look. She knew that if she looked upset, a frown would be enough to be labeled a sensitive woman of color. When the security guard finished, he didn't apologize. He just said dryly, "All clear. You can go." She just nodded slightly. Her high heels clicked rhythmically on the stone floor, blending with the loudspeaker's call, like a cold melody of familiarity. "Gate, C-17, CSA 2475, Dallas to Seattle." Maya arrived on time. The boarding gate was brightly lit. A line of business travelers was lined up ahead, mostly middle-aged white men with leather bags and confident smiles. When she handed over her ticket, first class, seat 2A, the gate agent looked at her longer than usual. "Can I see your ID?" "Ma'am." His voice was polite but cold. Maya handed over the card. He examined it carefully, very carefully. His eyes lingered on the photo, then turned to her a look that seemed to determine whether a woman of color was qualified to sit in that chair. "Thank you. Please come in," he said, but his voice was not respectful. She didn't answer, just pulled her suitcase and walked away. Behind her, she heard the attendant say to a white passenger, "Hello, Mr. Richardson. It's nice to see you again. Please come forward." Same action, but a different world. Maya let out a soft breath. Her mind was on the presentation slides on her laptop and the $300 million waiting to be signed. She couldn't let her emotions override her logic. The plane door opened, the cabin light reflecting off the first row of seats where she would be sitting. 2A, next to the window, first class. She walked over, nodding slightly to the flight attendant standing at the door, but the man, Colin Miller, the flight attendant in charge of the first cabin, suddenly frowned when he saw her. "Excuse me, could I see your ticket again?" Maya paused slightly. "I just scanned the gate. Seat 2A, first class." He glanced at the ticket, then at her. He said nothing, just turned to whisper to Brooke Sanders, the head stewardess, blonde hair, red lips, sharp eyes. Brooke approached, giving a polite smile. "Hello. Your ticket looks a bit different from the system." "How did you buy it?" Maya replied briefly. "Direct from the company website." Brooke tilted her head slightly, her voice sweet but hollow. "Oh, the system must be down. Could you please sit in economy class for now so we can verify?" Maya looked her straight in the eyes. In them, she saw not confusion but prejudice disguised as process. But she remained silent. No argument. She simply stood, gathered her laptop, and headed to the back of the cabin. Up ahead, Brooke turned, smiled warmly at a late white passenger, and ushered him to seat 2A Maya's. The camera paused as Maya sat down in seat 21B, between two strangers. She opened her laptop, but her hands were shaking slightly on the screen. A slide showed the words "Future of Flight Safety." She took a deep breath. No one in the cabin knew that the woman whose seat had just been removed was the one who held the power to decide the future of the airline they served. Amid the roar of the engine, Maya gently closed her laptop. There was no longer any anger in her eyes, only the sharp silence of someone who knew. Sometimes, justice doesn't need to speak. It just waits for the right moment to speak. The plane started taxiing down the runway, and that's when the real story begins. That morning, Dallas sunlight streamed through sheer curtains and onto the light wood floors. Dr. Maya Coleman's apartment was neat and quiet enough to hear the ticking of a clock. In the small kitchen, the coffee maker hummed softly, its aroma filling the room, the only luxury she allowed herself to slow down each day. Maya had just finished her final presentation for the signing of the Continental Star Airlines CSA. She carefully scanned every line, every chart, not because she lacked confidence, but because she knew that even a small mistake, one off number, one obscure detail could be enough to make others dismiss a woman of color's abilities. The phone vibrated. The screen showed the name, Mom. "Have you taken your medicine?" Mom's voice was weak, mixed with worry. "Yes, I have. I'm going to the airport soon," Maya replied, smiling slightly. A short silence passed. Only the sound of the wind outside the balcony could be heard. "Maya," Mom said, "your dad would be so proud if he saw you today." The words made her pause. Maya's eyes fell on a photograph hanging in the corner of the wall. Her father, Harold Coleman, a civil rights lawyer. In the photo, he was speaking to a crowd, microphone in hand, his eyes determined. She clearly remembered every word he said when she was 14 years old. "You have to be twice as good to be seen as half. You have to be twice as good just to be seen as half as much." Since childhood, Maya understood that life would not give her a fair starting point. But instead of complaining, she chose to calmly climb the ladder step by step, with ability and precision. She became an aeronautical engineer, then a doctor of flight technology, then a research director, and finally the CEO of Sky Vector Systems, a company that is changing the entire global aviation safety standards. Maya looked at her watch. 5:45 a.m. CSA 2475 left Dallas at 8:30. She had plenty of time, but she kept up with her habit of leaving early, partly out of caution, partly because she needed some quiet space before entering the pressure zone. On the table, the laptop was still open. The first slide read, "Sky Vector Systems, ex-Continental Star Airlines redefining the future of flight safety." She read it again, then closed the computer lid. The click sounded, neat as the final period of a manifesto. Maya put on her coat, buttoned the last button, and stepped out of the bedroom. The apartment was bright in the early morning light, everything perfectly arranged like her life, neat, controlled, and devoid of emotion. On the kitchen table, her mother had prepared a piece of paper that read, "Have a safe flight," and remember, grace is louder than anger. She smiled, folded the paper, and put it in her pocket. Instead of calling a private car, Maya took the train to the airport. It wasn't that she didn't have a driver or a company car. She just wanted to enjoy a few minutes of being a normal person, a passenger among other passengers. No one knew who she was. No one looked at her as the rare black CEO in the airline industry. Just a woman on a business trip, suitcase in hand, soft jazz playing on her headphones, As the train glided through the early morning light, Dallas was still hazy. Maya looked out the window, watching the small rows of houses recede into the distance. In that moment, she felt like she was looking at her own youth, the girl who had left the poverty-stricken South Oak Cliff neighborhood, carrying with her an impossible dream. A message popped up on the phone. Press release, Sky Vector Systems CEO to be announced at Aviation Safety Conference tomorrow. Maya skimmed through. That meant that today, no one at Continental Star Airlines knew that she was the head of Sky Vector. They only knew that a technical representative was coming. She smiled slightly. Fine, she thought. Let them see me without any title to protect me. Sometimes, she liked that being judged by her merits, not her titles. But deep down, Maya knew this temporary anonymity could make her the perfect target for petty, persistent prejudices. The train slowed as it pulled into the airport's central station. Maya stood up and adjusted her collar. Outside, the light reflected off the glass windows, revealing her clearly, confident, calm, seemingly untouchable. But inside, something still tingled the feeling that she was about to enter a place where justice did not always speak. She pulled her suitcase out, joining the crowd hurrying towards the check-in area. Each step echoed steadily on the bright stone floor, like the beat of a heart calm enough to hide its worries. As she passed the Continental Star Airlines counter, Maya caught a glimpse of large posters showing white male executives in the smart suits, smiling brightly under the logo CSA, the future of flight. She paused for a few seconds, looked at the photo, then quietly continued walking. The future of aviation, she thought, hasn't really taken off yet. In her mind, the image of her father appeared, the one who had stood in the middle of protests for equal rights, but always taught her that justice does not need to be heard by shouting. She knew that the world was not changed by shouting, but by those who were calm enough not to give up. Maya went through security and lined up like everyone else. She pulled out her phone and opened the communications email again. There was a small line at the bottom that she almost missed. CSA did not know the representative was female. She raised her eyebrows, not surprise, just a flicker of realization that, once again, she was about to walk into a room where everyone would be watching, not because she was a CEO, but because she was a woman of color in a seat of power. She put the phone away and let out a long breath. I'm used to it. At 38. Maya no longer reacted as she had in her 20s, no longer needing to prove anything, no longer needing to protest. She simply believed that composure was the only thing that would silence the world and make it listen. The domestic airport announced CSA 2475 departs at 8:30 gate C-17. Maya nodded slightly. Her steps were slow but steady. Little did she know that a few hours later she would face not just a meeting, but a test of dignity and power right on that very flight. The departure hall was lit by cold white lights. High glass walls reflected the silhouettes of hundreds of people fumbling with suitcases, tickets, and phones. Dr. Maya Coleman stood among them, calm, neat, clear-eyed, a tight-fitting dark blue suit, a sharp white collar, and silent high heels. She walked as if everything around her was in slow motion. Her right hand pulled a small suitcase. Her left hand held the phone displaying the QR code for flight CSA 2475, Dallas to Seattle. When she got to security, the line split into 3 lanes. Ahead of her were 3 white men in gray suits smiling, talking business, confident. They passed through the scanner without anyone stopping them, Just a soft beep. Then, "You're good, sir." It was her turn. Maya put her suitcase on the conveyor belt, took off her shoes, unbuckled her belt, all procedure. But as she was about to step through the scanner, a young security guard, a guy named Ryan, white, expressionless, held up his hand. "Ma'am, please go to lane 4 for random inspection." Maya looked up. There was no harshness in her voice, but no respect either. She looked around. No one else had been asked. Lane 4 was empty. There was only her and another female security guard wearing gloves. Maya said nothing. She took a deep breath, nodded, and moved to the next lane. As she raised her hand to scan the scanner, her eyes glanced at the mirror in front of her. The 3 men from earlier were walking away, talking and laughing, their suitcases rolling smoothly on the polished stone floor. One of them turned back, glanced at her, then turned away. It was just a small look, but Maya was too familiar with it to analyze. "Why you," she said. The female security officer began to run a metal detector around her, then asked to check her carry-on bag. "We need to open this bag, ma'am." Maya nodded, not arguing. Inside the bag were only a laptop, a charger, and a file. She watched the white-gloved hands flip through the contents as if searching for something other than metal. She knew this wasn't unusual, not new, and perhaps not random. People often talk about random screening, but for her, that word had long lost its meaning. She had seen too many coincidences that only happened to people with skin like hers, in hotels, in conference rooms, and now, at the security gate of an airport where she had helped design passenger screening software. Maya tried to keep her breathing steady, not because she was afraid, but because she knew that if she showed any signs of frustration, the entire system would immediately change positions. The offended person would become the troublemaker. When the test was over, Ryan said, "All clear. You can go." There was no apology, no look of acknowledgement that they had just wasted 5 minutes of her time. 5 minutes that were nothing, but represented a lifetime. Maya nodded slightly, packed her things, picked up her suitcase and walked out. Her high heels clicked rhythmically on the stone floor, each sound echoing coldly in the chaotic noise of the airport. She didn't look back. Never. As she walked out of the inspection area, Maya lightly touched her pocket. Where the note her mother left her this morning was still graces louder than anger. She smiled, very slightly, not a pleasant smile, but the smile of someone who was used to keeping her composure for a generation. She stopped at the coffee shop near the departure gate. The line was long, the smell of espresso mixed with the loudspeaker. She ordered a latte and waited for it. A young employee at the counter asked, "Are you on a business trip?" "Yeah, Seattle. Do you work for an airline?" The question was simple, but Maya suddenly found it interesting. She smiled lightly. "Not really. I help them fly safer." She took the coffee and found a seat near the window. Outside, planes were parked in long rows, the sunlight shining on their shiny metal bodies. She looked at those giant wings and thought of her own journey, a kind of flight, except that no one was taking her off. Every step was her own, against the gravity of prejudice. She opened her phone and glanced at the meeting schedule, 0945, pre-flight safety check, 11:00, Continental Star boardroom meeting. Seattle HQ. Everything was planned perfectly. Only, no one in the schedule could have predicted that a mere coincidence at the airport would become the spark that would ignite a shockwave throughout the entire aviation industry. when the intercom announced, CSA 2475 to Seattle is now checking in at gate C-17. Maya stood up. She put down her cold coffee, adjusted her vest, and headed toward the gate. In her mind, the image of her father appeared again, the one who had stood before the court, speaking about equality with a voice that did not tremble. Justice does not come from the screamer, he once said, but from the man who is calm enough to stand still amidst the scream. She walked slowly, but firmly. A bit of the cold from the stone floor crept through her heels, enough for her to feel each step. Up ahead, the Continental Star Airlines Flight 2475 sign lit up. A line of people were waiting to board. She heard someone say behind her, they said there's a flight safety expert on board today to meet the CEO of CSA. I heard he's a man. Yeah, it's this industry. Who would give a $300 million contract to a woman? She didn't turn around. Only the corners of her lips moved slightly. Not from pain, not from anger, just familiarity. When she handed the ticket to the gate agent, he looked at her, then at the ticket a beat longer. Maya kept her polite smile. First class. 2A, she said. Yes, please wait a moment, he replied, his voice off-key. He took her ticket and walked over to the desk where two other clerks were talking. One of them looked up, glanced at her, and muttered something. It was one of those half-smiles, the familiar kind, not exactly rude, but one that made you feel like you were being judged. She took a deep breath. I need to leave early. I still have to prepare documents for the meeting in Seattle. I understand. Ma'am, the system is verifying. System. The word made her chuckle inwardly. For the past 10 years, she had made a living by debugging the system, both literally and figuratively. And now, another system was testing her. When he finally returned the ticket, his voice was dry. Please come up. She nodded, walked away. Unaware that it was just the first discriminatory nudge, small, sensible, but one that would lead to a chain of events that would cost the entire airline. Gate C-17 opened before Dr. Maya Coleman like a small stage where old prejudices played their roles, day after day. The electronic board displayed Flight CSA 2475 Dallas to Seattle on time. The loudspeaker blared, and the flight attendant announced the first group of passengers to be invited to board. First class and priority passengers may now board. Maya pulled her suitcase forward. She was always in line, on time. It was not only a professional habit, but also a way of protecting herself, not giving anyone an excuse to think she was unprofessional. Ahead of her, a group of white men in expensive suits were laughing and talking. One was even on the phone, waving his boarding pass through the scanner without even looking at the gate agent. Welcome aboard, Mr. Hunt. The male clerk smiled warmly, his voice as light as the wind. Then it was Maya's turn. She showed her boarding pass, first class, seat 2A. The gate agent, a blonde woman named Lydia, looked at the ticket, then looked up at Maya. The look lasted longer than the usual beat. Not curiosity, but verification. Can I see your ID, ma'am? Her tone wasn't harsh, but there was something about it that made the air freeze. Maya pulled out her wallet and handed over her ID. Lydia took it, set it on the table, looked at it for a long time comparing the photo and face, then glanced down at her boarding pass again. Her fingers tapped lightly on the tabletop, as if trying to find something wrong. Did you buy this ticket directly from the airline? Yes, Maya replied briefly. The silence was like clockwork. Behind them, the line began to move forward. A few light coughs, footsteps, a man standing right behind Maya, white, about 50, gray suit, Rolex watch, raised his eyebrows, looking impatient. "What's the matter?" he asked, his voice half impatient, half annoyed. Lydia turned back, smiling hastily. "It's nothing. Sir, please come up." The scanner beeped, and the man passed through without needing to show anything else. Maya remained standing, her ID still in Lydia's hand. In that moment, she felt as if time had slowed down. No one raised their voices, no one insulted them, but the difference was more evident than any words. "Thanks for waiting, ma'am," Lydia finally said, her voice no longer as cheerful as before. "Please come in." Maya nodded, took back the ID card, and said calmly, "Thank you." Just 2 words, not a high tone, but enough for her to retain the one thing they couldn't touch, her dignity. She stepped into the jetway. The cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of metal and coffee from first class. Her footsteps echoed over the distant roar of the engines, steady and unhurried. Maya glanced at the ticket again. Seat 2A right in the front row, next to the window. It was a short flight, 3 hours, but she knew it was often the briefest moments that revealed the truest character of a person. Behind her, Lydia's voice rang out again, this time to another passenger. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Callahan." Her voice suddenly warmed, her smile blossoming. Maya listened, but did not turn around. She just kept her eyes straight ahead, as if there was an invisible runway before her. In her mind, fragments of memories surfaced, meetings where she was mistaken for an assistant despite being the chairperson. Parties where she was asked, "What department are you in?" right after her CEO speech. Glances as quick as a flash, but enough to strip away the equality she had worked so hard for all her life. No, Lydia did nothing wrong. It was just the process. But those processes, when repeated enough, create a system of discrimination that no one dares to name. When Maya touched the cabin door, she paused. In front of her was Colin Miller, the young male flight attendant in charge of greeting passengers. He smiled at the person in front of him, bowed his head, and spoke warmly. But when he saw Maya, his smile faltered. "Hello," she said, her voice calm. "Hello? Could I see your ticket again?" Maya looked at him, her eyes expressionless. I scanned at the gate. "Yes, just to confirm." She handed over the ticket. Colin glanced at it, then turned and whispered something to Brooke Sanders, the head stewardess standing nearby. Brooke, blonde hair, neat uniform, practiced smile looked Maya up and down. After a moment of assessment, she stepped forward, her voice soft but cold. "Sorry, this ticket seems strange. Did you buy it with points or some special program?" "No, first class, bought directly from the airline website," Maya replied, her voice still even. Brooke smiled, that half-smile people use when they don't believe what they hear. "Thank you. We just need to verify a little. Could you wait beside us while we check behind her?" Passengers began to file in, their eyes passing over Maya. No one said anything, but she sensed the silent questions in their gazes. Did she do something wrong? She stood silently aside. Brooke said something into the walkie-talkie, then looked back at Maya. "Thanks for your patience. Ma'am, we'll take care of it." "Ma'am," again. Again, the cold, empty tone, not really respectful. 3 minutes, 4 minutes. Another white man comes up to scan his ticket, beep, and is invited to board immediately. Maya took a deep breath. She could have said what she thought. She could have asked to see the manager, but she knew the outcome. She made a big deal out of it just because she was being checked. She had seen it too many times. This time, she chose to keep quiet, because she understood her silence was not concession, but observation. Finally, Lydia called back from the gate. "She's fine." Brooke returned the ticket, her voice benevolent. "Thank you for your cooperation. Please come up." Maya took the ticket back, her eyes unwavering. "Thank you," she said, as light as a breath. She stepped into the cabin, her small suitcase rolling behind her. Her shoes clicked on the metal floor, a steady beat, neither too fast nor too slow, the beat of someone who knew she wouldn't have to shout to be heard. Up ahead, soft yellow lights illuminated the first-class seats. Seat 2A was waiting. Maya sat down, adjusted her seat belt, opened her laptop, and typed a few notes. Little did she know that at this moment, those who had just doubted her would soon understand it was not the passengers they looked down on, but the people who decided their own futures. The cabin door opened, white light reflecting off the shiny metal surface. The air in the cabin was cold and quiet. The scent of coffee and expensive perfume wafted through the narrow space. Dr. Maya Coleman walked in, pulling her suitcase, her eyes calm, her steps steady. At the door, young male flight attendant Colin Miller bowed to the passengers with the familiar smile of someone who had flown hundreds of flights. But when his eyes met Maya, the smile stopped. A moment of pause, enough for the observant to realize something has changed. "Hello, miss?" Colin hesitated. "Could I see your ticket again?" Maya looked up slightly, her gaze unwavering. "I just scanned the gate. Seat 2A, first class." Her voice was soft, even, without a trace of irritation. But Colin still stared at the ticket longer than necessary. He glanced from the ticket to Maya's face, then back down again, as if searching for some misalignment that wasn't there. Just confirming. "Ma'am." The word "ma'am" came out as a distance, not insulting, but not respectful either. Maya nodded, keeping her composure. "Are you sure Colin didn't answer right away?" He turned and whispered to Brooke Sanders, the blonde head stewardess, who was standing at the front of the cabin. Brooke turned back, a polite smile on her face, but her eyes were cold. She approached, her voice soft and mechanically polite. "Hello, I'm Brooke, the flight attendant. It looks like there's a little problem with your ticket." Maya looked at her straight, her eyes not avoiding. "What's the problem? Our system shows that seat 2A is already reserved for another passenger. Your ticket may have been misread during the verification process. I bought the ticket directly from the airline website. Here's the payment confirmation and seat number," Maya replied, her voice still calm, as if presenting facts and not arguing. Brooke smiled slightly, tilting her head. "Yes, I understand. But sometimes the online system doesn't update properly. Can you tell me which channel you purchased it through? Maybe a promotional ticket or reward points?" The question was more than just doubt. It carried the assumption that Maya was not qualified to sit in that seat. Maya knew it. She looked Brooke straight in the eyes, her voice low and slow. "No, first class, paid in full." There was a brief silence. Brooke kept smiling, but she handed Colin the ticket, whispering. Colin nodded, then moved toward the front of the compartment, as if to check with the system. Maya remained still. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her. Some were curious. Others looked away, as if afraid of being dragged in. Brooke stood there, a smile plastered on her face. "Please, wait a moment," Ma'am, we just want to make sure that everyone is seated properly. I was sitting in the right seat, Maya replied shortly. Brooke paused, then looked down at the ticket again, as if to convince herself that something was wrong. A moment later, Colin returned and whispered something in Brooke's ear. She nodded, then turned to Maya, her voice laced with fake pity. Sorry, it looks like the system has confirmed that this seat has already been assigned to someone else. I'm afraid you'll need to move down to economy class while we verify. Maya looked at her for a few seconds. Silent. There was no anger in her eyes, just the silence of someone who was used to this. I paid for first class. Are you sure? Brooke smiled and replied softly. I understand, but we cannot let empty seats be occupied without system verification. We hope you understand. Sympathy, a word as light as cotton, but heavy enough to weigh down on dignity. Maya nodded. Okay, where should I sit? Brooke flipped through the list on her tablet. Seat 21B, in economy class. Once we've verified, you can come back. She said maybe, as if it never really happened. Maya collected her ticket, pulled her small suitcase, and walked away. No one stopped her, nor did anyone apologize. As she passed the first-class seats, a few eyes followed her. No one spoke, but she clearly felt the looks of surprise and judgment. Maybe she bought the wrong ticket. She paused for a second at seat 2A, her seat. Then she quietly walked down to the back compartment. Just then, a white man in a navy blue suit, wearing a wireless headset, hurriedly boarded the plane. Brooke immediately changed her tone. Welcome, Mr. Ellison. We have reserved seat 2A for you. Please sit down. No ID required, no ticket verification required, no suspicion. Maya stopped at row 21 middle seat, 21B. She sat down, placing her small suitcase under her seat. The space was cramped. People were talking loudly. A lump formed in her throat, but she did not let it turn into anger. She pulled out her laptop and reopened the presentation. The screen reflected off her face, calm, sharp, silent. Another flight attendant, an older black woman, walked by. She saw Brooke chatting and laughing in first class, and her eyes fell silent. She leaned down and asked Maya softly, "Is everything okay?" "Miss Fine," Maya replied softly. But the look in the woman's eyes, Gloria Harris, said she understood. She had seen this before, too many times. When Maya turned back to look up at the front of the cabin, she saw Brooke leaning over to pour a drink for Mr. Ellison in seat 2A, her seat. She was smiling brightly, as if the world had just been righted again. Maya gently closed her eyes. In her ears, her father's voice rang out like a reminder. You don't need to shout to be heard. Just stand still. In time, the truth will speak for you. She took a deep breath, opened her laptop again, and continued working as if nothing had happened. Little did she know that in just a few hours, the very people who looked down on her would be standing before her to apologize with fear. Seat 21B, between two strangers, cramped, noisy, and completely different from the world she had just been pushed out of. No wine, no warm towels, no welcoming smiles, just the dry sound of the fan and the smell of stale coffee. Dr. Maya Coleman sat up straight, her eyes focused on her laptop screen, but the words on the slides were blurred. Not from tears she wasn't crying, but from a deep, rising fatigue. She was no stranger to this. In 15 years in the airline industry, she had heard, seen, and endured such system failures. But today was different. today, they weren't just humiliating her. They were humiliating the person who kept them safe every day. She took a deep breath. Her late father had once taught her there are victories that come in silence. If you just stand still long enough. She knew she was in the midst of one of those moments. The man sitting by the window turned slightly. He was an Asian man about 35 years old, thin, wearing a simple white shirt and thin glasses. He smiled gently and politely. I saw what happened. In first class. Maya looked up, frowning slightly, not defensively, just surprised. You saw, yeah. I was right in the back row. The way they talked to her, he paused, was unprofessional. She was silent. She didn't want to complain, nor did she want anyone's pity, but there was something different in his voice. Not pity, but understanding. I'm Daniel Park, a reporter for Tech Horizons magazine. I write about aviation technology and diversification in the tech industry. He held out his hand, smiling slightly. Maya shook it, nodding slightly. Maya Coleman. Daniel caught a glimpse of the SkyVector Systems logo on her laptop lid. He raised an eyebrow. SkyVector. I interviewed a group of engineers there. They're working on safety updates. Right? Yes, she replied, her voice calm. He looked at her for another second, then lowered his voice. I know you don't need strangers to interfere, but I caught them pushing you down into this compartment. Both flight attendants' faces were clearly visible. Maya stopped typing. You came back. I was filming when they were talking about ticket verification. I was just going to write an article about discrimination on flights, but I didn't expect to come across this typical case. He opened his phone and showed her a short clip. Brooke was smiling awkwardly while Colin checked her ticket a second time. Over the noise, the words could be clearly heard. This ticket looks a bit strange. Maya looked at the screen, then gently closed it. What are you going to do with it? If you want to do this properly, I can help you get the testimony, the times, the crew descriptions. I have experience handling these types of cases. She looked at him for a long time, her eyes unreadable. She didn't like noise. She didn't like retaliation. She believed that silence had its own power. But this time, a small part of her felt grateful because someone outside dared to see. Aren't you afraid of being a nuisance? She asked. If I keep quiet, I'll be like them, Daniel said, his voice soft but firm. Maya tilted her head slightly, the corners of her lips curling up into a faint smile. You seem to understand the system. I'm Korean, born in California. Trust me, I know what it's like to be seen as not enough in a room full of white people. For the first time since boarding the plane, Maya laughed, a small laugh, as if she had released some of the tension. She closed her laptop, leaned back in her seat, and looked out the window, where the sunlight was shining on the silver wings of the plane. Daniel, what do you think will happen if I complain? Maybe they apologize to you with a voucher. Maybe they deny it, saying it was a system error. Or, he looked at her, a smile flickering. You could make the whole company reconsider its policy. She did not reply. Only her eyes lit up briefly, then went out. As the plane began to taxi, Daniel took out his notebook and wrote down the time CSA 2475 boarding 8:12 a.m., departure 8:37 a.m. He asked softly, Do you remember the chief stewardess's name, Brooke Sanders? And the conductor's name was Colin Miller, Captain Edward Shaw. He wrote it down in small but clear handwriting. Thank you. I'm not sure I'll use these facts unless you agree. but at least there will be a record of what happened." Maya looked at him. The stranger, sitting by the window, on an anonymous flight, doing what people with more power than him had been doing for years listening. "You know," she said, her voice low, "I've spent my life designing systems to prevent aircraft from failing, but it seems humans are the hardest software to fix." Daniel smiled sadly. "Sometimes, all it takes is someone who dares to debug." They were both silent. The engine hummed steadily, vibrating slightly. She turned back to her laptop. He continued to take notes. There were few words, but something had been established between them, the trust of people who saw the truth together. A few minutes later, Gloria Harris, an elderly flight attendant, walked by. She stopped for a moment when she saw Maya. "Is everything okay, Miss Fine?" "Thanks," Maya replied. Gloria nodded and poured her coffee. As she left, she discreetly left a small folded napkin under her cup. Daniel saw it but said nothing. Maya opened it, and inside were a few lines written in the shaky handwriting. "If you would like to make a report, please send it to this internal address equity AXA Air Com. CC to the Diversity Protection Group. I'm retiring. Nothing to lose." GH Maya looked at the words, then looked up. The stewardess was gone, her slender figure in the narrow aisle. She gently put the paper in her pocket. Daniel asked softly, "Is she your ally?" "No, just someone who has seen more than me." Her voice was low but firm. As the plane steadied and the seatbelt sign went off, Maya looked out the window, where the white clouds stretched out like a calm sea. Somewhere beneath those clouds, there were old systems still operating on prejudice. But in that moment, she knew justice. Sometimes doesn't begin with screaming, but with someone daring to record what they saw and someone calm enough not to look away. The plane had been in flight for almost an hour. The atmosphere in the economy cabin had calmed down, but Maya Coleman's heart still had small ripples that would not subside. She opened her laptop, intending to continue editing her presentation slides for tomorrow's meeting, but her mind kept wandering back to the eyes and voices in first class. Beside him, Daniel Park was still taking careful notes, occasionally glancing at his watch to mark the time. He did not ask any further questions, just kept a respectful silence. The silence of someone who understands that there are battles that do not need words. A service trolley stopped quietly in front of their row. An elderly woman, slightly bent, with a kind face, a gentle smile but tired eyes, Gloria Harris, a flight attendant from the back cabin. She glanced at Maya, just a glance, but as if she recognized something familiar. "Coffee, miss?" Her voice was low, warm, and a little shaky. Maya nodded slightly. "Thank you." She poured the coffee, her hand shaking slightly, but not because of age, but because of something boiling inside her that she had to keep under control. As she set the cup down on the folding table in front of Maya, she quietly tucked a folded napkin under it. Maya glanced at him, but said nothing. She just nodded, as if it were a normal social gesture. Gloria continued pushing the cart, serving the next row of seats. When she disappeared behind the row of passengers, Maya unfolded the paper. The handwriting was shaky, but clear. "If you would like to report the incident, please send it to equityaxaair.com, CC to Diversity Council. I'm retiring. Nothing to lose. GH below." She drew a small arrow. "Don't let them do that to anyone else." Maya finished reading, folded the paper, and placed her hand on it as a way to calm herself. Sometimes justice begins with such small pieces of paper, quiet, informal, but filled with the courage of someone who has suffered too long. Daniel leaned over and asked softly, "What's the matter?" Maya looked around, then placed the paper in her palm, gently opening it for him to see. He finished reading it, nodded, his eyes serious. She was brave. It's not easy for an airline employee to do that. "I know," Maya said softly. "She wasn't writing to me. She was writing to all those who had been treated the way I was." Daniel sat still, not responding. After a while, he opened his notebook and wrote down a short note. Gloria Harris, veteran flight attendant, silent witness. When Gloria returned to collect the cup, she looked at Maya again. This time, there were no words, just a look that was both apologetic and trusting. Maya said softly, "Thank you, Gloria." Her name was spoken as lightly as a breath, but it was enough to make Gloria freeze. She looked at Maya for a few more seconds, her eyes filled with the sadness of someone who had seen too much injustice and had no power to correct it. "They think no one will see it," she said softly, almost in a whisper. "But I have, for years." Maya nodded. "I know, and I won't let this go." Gloria looked at her another beat, then smiled slightly, a relieved smile as if she had just put down a burden. "Good. I look forward to that day," she said and turned away. The cart continued rolling smoothly on the path, carrying the sound of wheels squeaking softly on the carpet. Daniel looked, then turned to Maya. "Do you realize she's not just helping you? She's leaving her legacy." "Yes." Maya nodded slightly, her eyes looking far away. "Sometimes, justice does not come from the powerful. It comes from those who are too tired to remain silent." She opened her laptop and began to jot down some notes, not for tomorrow's presentation, but for the meeting she knew would come after this flight. Outside the window, Dallas was behind. The clouds lay in layers beneath the plane like a calm ocean. Daniel tilted his head to look at Maya. He didn't know who she really was, only that she wasn't the type of person who reacted the way most people did. She didn't argue. She didn't scream. She didn't demand her seat back. She just watched. She took in, and she waited for the right moment to act. He thought to himself, if everyone had that kind of calmness, the world would be a more just place. There was a ding, and the seatbelt sign came on. The captain announced that the plane was experiencing light turbulence. The cabin shook, and a few passengers let out small, frightened gasps. Maya looked up, her eyes sharpening. She heard the hiss of faulty radar, the distinctive sound of the old sensor her company had warned CSA to replace 3 months ago. Half of her wanted to smile the irony of fate. But she said nothing, just looked out, whispering to herself, when the truth shakes, the weakest parts are revealed first. Daniel couldn't hear clearly, only saw the corner of her lips slightly raised. Gloria turned back, holding on to the armrests of the chair for balance. "Are you okay?" she asked, raising her voice to be heard over the engine. "Fine," Maya said. She nodded, then walked away, still rocking the stroller with the rhythm. A minute later, when the plane had stabilized, Maya opened her phone and quickly typed a note, CSA 2475, discriminatory conduct, witness Gloria Harris, video evidence Daniel Park. She didn't write anything else. She just saved it, locked the screen, and leaned her head back in her seat. In the cabin above, in seat 2A. The man who had replaced her was taking her second drink order. Brooke was still smiling. Still serving as if nothing had happened, Colin stood at the cabin door, occasionally glancing back. Little did they know that in the economy cabin, in seat 21B, the woman they thought was a business-class passenger was recording every minute of the journey, and that, in just a few hours, her silence would rock their entire system. The loudspeaker signaled that the plane had reached a stable altitude, soft and steady. The white light in the cabin turned soft, and the passengers began to relax. Some opened their laptops, some ordered drinks, and some closed their eyes to sleep. Dr. Maya Coleman was still sitting in seat 21B, her laptop on the folding table. She was reviewing her final presentation, the most important contract of her career, the one that could change the entire position of SkyVector systems on the world aviation map. The new email notification sound went off. She opened her inbox. From David Lang, Vice President of Sales. Headline, Big News, Pierce signed draft. Maya opened the letter, her eyes skimming over each line. Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Continental Star Airlines, just signed a draft contract worth $300 million. They will make it official tomorrow at the Seattle conference. Pierce said he will personally meet the SkyVector Systems representative at the airport when the plane lands. Prepare a great presentation. Maya, he's very excited to meet the new face of SkyVector. Maya sat silently. The light from the screen reflected coldly in her eyes. The new face of SkyVector. That was her. She was the representative Jonathan Pierce had spoken of. And it was his airline, Continental Star Airlines, where she was forced to sit in economy class after being kicked out of her first-class seat. A smile crossed her lips. Not a happy one, but the bitter smile of someone who has just realized how cruel a sense of humor fate has. Daniel looked over and saw a strange expression on her face. "What's the matter?" She turned the screen to him, her voice even and emotionless. The person they just kicked out of first class was the person the airline CEO was picking up at the airport. Daniel opened his eyes wide, then chuckled softly, as if he couldn't believe the irony. "Are you serious? I wish I was joking." She closed her laptop, clasped her hands together, and looked straight up to the front cabin, where soft yellow lights surrounded the first-class seats, crystal glasses, and soft laughter. Brooke and Colin were still working there, unaware. The man sitting in seat 2A, her seat, was being served wine and breakfast. They were all innocent. None of them knew that in a few hours they would be at the center of a crisis that no PR department could save. Daniel leaned back in his chair and whispered, "If it were a movie, the audience would think this detail was exaggerated." Maya smiled slightly, but her eyes remained cold. "No, Daniel, reality only magnifies human arrogance." He nodded, his eyes quiet. "So, what are you going to do?" "Nothing. Not yet." She spoke softly, her voice as light as a breath, but with a weight that silenced Daniel. In first class. Brooke was talking on the walkie-talkie with Colin, her voice low but loud enough for a nearby passenger to hear. "Has her ticket been verified?" "No response yet, but I assume it was a bill in error." "Yeah, never mind. First class is for real passengers." The two men chuckled. A middle-aged man in a nearby row glanced at them, his eyes disapproving, but then looked away. People didn't like to interfere, especially when the person in question was a black woman sitting at the very back of the plane. Maya saw it, without standing up, just a glance. She learned to observe from her father, a civil rights lawyer, who once said, sometimes, You don't need to scream to expose injustice. Just let them talk long enough, and they will reveal their true colors. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and listened to the steady hum of the engine. In that quiet moment, she saw her father, in her memory, smiling down at her. You have to be twice as good to be seen as half. The words still rang like a heartbeat, and today, she knew she was about to prove him right. Daniel turned and whispered, I think you should let them know who you are. Now. Maya opened her eyes and looked at him. If I tell them now, they'll call the manager, apologize, and forget about it as soon as the plane lands. I don't need an apology. I need change. Daniel looked at her for a long time, then nodded. I get it. A moment later, Gloria walked by. She saw Maya and Daniel talking and stopped, as if understanding that they were planning something bigger. She gently touched the arm of Maya's chair, her voice low enough for only the two of them to hear. They don't know what a big mistake they just made. I know, Maya replied, her eyes deep and calm. She nodded slightly, then continued walking. Maya reopened her laptop and composed a new email, not sending it, just saving it as a draft. To Jonathan Pierce, subject regarding your crew on flight CSA 2475 Jonathan. Tomorrow, before we finalize our partnership, there's something you should see about how your people treat mine. Dr. Maya Coleman, CEO, Sky Vector Systems. She didn't press. Send, no need, not now, but she knew that in less than 24 hours, everything they did today would become a textbook example of how a system can shoot itself in the foot. She looked up to see Brooke scanning the cabin, her face confident and calm. If she knew the woman she had forced into economy held the keys to a multi-million-dollar contract, she might have bowed her head differently. But justice does not need to bow. Justice only needs time and truth, Daniel said softly, his voice slow. Strangely, you're not angry. Maya smiled. I don't need to be angry to win. I just need to be right. She closed her laptop and looked toward the front of the cabin. Everything seemed normal, but between the steady hum of the engines and the soft lighting, something had changed. Not on a plane, but in the balance of power, and in just a few hours, this small world, where prejudice sits in the front seat and justice is relegated to the middle seat, will turn itself upside down. The plane continued to hover in the air, as if unaware that in a small compartment behind it, a storm was brewing not with shouts, but with notes. Dr. Maya Coleman reopened her laptop. Beside her, Daniel Park still held his notebook, pen poised. They were both silent, the only sounds being the keyboard and the plane. Maya began to write, each line clear and systematic, like the way she would design software for a radar system, incident timeline, CSA 24750755, boarding at gate D12, 0800, gate agent requests ID verification despite online check-in. 0804, Brooke Sanders, Chief Flight Attendant, requests to leave seat 2A. 0806, Colin Miller assists in moving to 21B. 0808, white passenger identity unknown is taken to seat 2A without being checked. 0810, other passenger records Daniel Park. 0812, Captain Edward Shaw is present in the cabin, reported resolved. 0815, takeoff. Daniel skimmed through it and nodded. Very neat. But what do you intend to use it for? Maya looked up slightly, her eyes bright but calm. Not just to demand seats. I want them to face the system they created. Daniel looked at her intently. He saw the calmness of someone used to pressure, but he also saw a small flame smoldering in her eyes. Do you want me to contact some passengers nearby? I remember someone in row 20 turned to look at you when they kicked you out. If they are willing, fine. But you have to be clear. I don't want this to turn into a sensational article. I want the truth, not drama." Daniel nodded and smiled. "Rest assured. I write for readers, not for algorithms." Maya laughed softly, the first time in hours. It was short, but real. After a few minutes, Daniel turned around and lowered his voice. "Maya, let me ask you this. Do you work at SkyVector, correct? What level?" She stopped typing, looked at him, her smile as thin as a knife, as high as possible. Daniel raised his eyebrows slightly, half believing and half not believing. "What do you mean?" "CEO." He was silent for a few seconds, then let out a small, surprised laugh. "You're saying this airline just relegated the CEO of its $300 million safety system partner to an economy seat?" Maya just nodded. "They don't know yet. They think the SkyVector representative is sitting somewhere up there, sipping champagne in first class." Daniel looked at her, half surprised, half admiring. "Oh my God, this is no small mistake anymore. This is a bomb." "No," Maya said softly. "It's just a lesson. I don't want to blow them up. I want them to hear a pin drop in silence." She continued to take notes, adding new sections to the file. Supporting evidence, video discriminatory behavior, recorded by passenger Daniel Park. Witness Gloria Harris, CSA veteran flight attendant. Physical evidence. 2, a first-class ticket, valid boarding pass. Notes, staff attitude, tone, sarcasm. Objective, no personal complaint. Request review of CSA's anti-discrimination training policy. When Maya wrote that, Daniel said softly, "You don't want them to pay no." "Daniel, I want them to change. I've seen too many people pay the price, but the system remains the same. Sometimes the best way to teach people is to let them see their mistakes for themselves, by losing the thing they love most." "Money," he asked. "Prestige," she replied, cold as steel. Daniel nodded, silent. He began typing rapidly into his phone, searching for the email of the CSA Communications Department. "If necessary, I can send them this clip, asking for comments before the article is published. That is standard procedure. They will know what is coming." "No," Maya interrupted. "You keep it until I say so. I want them to see me first, not SkyVector in the headline." He looked at her, surprised. "I'm planning." "No," she replied slowly. "I'm only preparing for justice to take its place." She saved everything, set a password, and opened a new mailbox. In the title bar, she typed "Meeting with CSA, Contract Review." Below, just one line. "Let's make sure our systems, both digital and human, are equally safe." She clicked Save Draft. Daniel skimmed through it, then shook his head slightly. "I don't hit, but I know how to make the opponent fall." Maya smiled. Justice does not need to be beaten. It only needs truth and timing. The sunlight filtered through the clouds and shone on her face. In that moment, Daniel understood why she wasn't angry. Because anger is a reaction, while wisdom is a counterattack. In the front cabin, Brooke smiled at the passengers in 2A, her voice artificially sweet. Little did she know, in the archive file behind seat 21B, every second of this morning was recorded. Every look, every word. Not to shame, but to illuminate. Maya closed her laptop and looked straight out the window. She spoke softly, as if to herself. But Daniel heard clearly tomorrow. They will understand that respect is not a service, it is a foundation. Daniel nodded slowly. "I'll be there if you need me." "You will be needed there," Maya replied, her voice soft but firm. The loudspeaker rang out, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent to Seattle." Maya pursed her lips and smiled slightly. Above, the people who had just looked down on her began clearing away their trays and adjusting their vests, ready to welcome SkyVector's distinguished guests. Little did they know that the distinguished guest was sitting a few rows away, quietly looking out the window, about to teach them the most expensive lesson an airline could ever receive. The Seattle sky suddenly turned leaden. In a matter of minutes, the calm light of the cloud layer above was replaced by thick gray. The engine roared, deep and heavy. The Boeing 737 shuddered, then shook harder. A few passengers gasped, and the drinks on the trays spilled and sloshed. Dr. Maya Coleman looked out the window, her gaze unflinching. She realized something was wrong. It wasn't a shake. It was a short, sharp, steady beep from the overhead warning system. The sound was familiar. It was the sound of old radar, the kind her company, SkyVector Systems, had warned Continental Star Airlines CSA to replace 3 months earlier. They had refused, saying it was not necessary at this stage. Now, that very error is causing the entire plane to become unstable. Daniel Park looked around, noticing many passengers starting to get scared. "What's the matter?" he asked softly. Maya kept her eyes out the window. The radar was given a false reading. They thought there was serious interference, but it was just a signal reading error. Error of the old system. Yeah, the system they're going to buy from SkyVector to replace. Daniel was silent. He didn't dare laugh, but the irony chilled him. The captain's loudspeaker sounded, slightly trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some turbulence. Please fasten your seat belts and remain calm." But the voice did not calm anyone. The plane shook more violently. Some people screamed. Others gripped the handrails. In first class, a shrill voice called out, "Help me, I can't breathe." One passenger, the man sitting in seat 2A, which was originally Maya's, was panicking, his face pale, breathing heavily. Flight attendant Brooke Sanders immediately ran over. She fumbled for the oxygen tank, her hands shaking. Colin Miller also appeared, his voice urgent. "Call the captain. Call the doctor on board." A young female passenger burst into tears, holding her husband's hand. Everything was chaotic. Daniel looked over at Maya, seeing her still sitting still, her hand on her seatbelt. "Aren't you scared?" Maya shook her head, her voice low and even. "I know this plane can handle 3 times this, but they can't." He looked at her, waiting for something. And then she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "What are you going to do?" "Do my job." Maya walked down the aisle, surrounded by panicked faces. A flight attendant tried to stop her. "Ma'am, please sit down." She just looked at that person, resolutely but not angrily. "I'm an aeronautical engineer. I can help." The voice was strong enough to make the other person stop. Maya went straight to the front of the cabin. Brooke and Colin were debating whether to request an emergency landing. Captain Edward Shaw came out, his face pale. "We have a passenger with health problems, possibly heart," Brooke said quickly. "Not the heart." Maya interrupted. "All back." The radar warning system was wrong. The plane was shaken because of a faulty signal, not because of the weather. He was just having a panic attack because he thought the plane was going to crash. The captain frowned. "Who are you, doctor?" "Maya Coleman, SkyVector Systems. I designed the aviation safety system your company's about to purchase." There was a moment of silence, as if someone had frozen the air. If you look at the dashboard, the pressure warnings are going crazy. Turn off the auxiliary sensors. Switch to manual mode. Trust me. The captain hesitated, but when he looked at the radar screen and saw that it was as she said, his eyes changed. He signaled to Colin, "Do as she says." Colin was still hesitant. "Sir, I don't think do it." "Miller." The captain's voice was firm. Colin swallowed and performed the operation. 3 seconds later, the alarm stopped. The plane stopped shaking. The whole cabin seemed to breathe again. Passengers clapped and let out a collective sigh of relief. Brooke looked around, still not understanding what had just happened. Maya bent down to check on the man in seat 2A. She spoke softly, as if coaxing a child, "You're okay, everything's fine." He looked up, his eyes still filled with fear. "You are the man who should have been sitting in my chair." Captain Shaw turned, his voice hoarse. Who do you say you are, Dr. Maya Coleman, CEO of Sky Vector Systems, and that faulty radar is why I came to Seattle today to sell you a new, safer system." Brooke stood frozen. Colin opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. None of them dared to look Maya straight in the eye. Maya stood up straight and adjusted her vest. Her voice was calm and clear. "Without a trace of pride, I don't need anyone's apologies. I just want you to remember that respect costs nothing, and sometimes it can save lives." The captain bowed slightly. Brooke stepped back, speechless. Colin looked at the floor, his face burning. Maya turned and walked back to row 21B. As she passed Gloria Harris, the old woman tilted her head and smiled. Her eyes said, "I know." Daniel looked up as she sat back in her chair. "You just saved the flight." "No," Maya replied softly. "I just fixed the mistakes they missed." He looked at her for a long time, then exhaled. "You know, the moment you stood up, I understood why you are the CEO. Not because you know more, but because you never let anger dictate your actions." Maya didn't answer. She just looked out the window, where weak rays of light were beginning to filter through the clouds. On the cockpit display, the radar stabilized. Captain Shaw looked at it, then muttered a sentence that only he could hear. "Thank you, Dr. Coleman." Outside, the plane continued its uneventful journey toward Seattle. Inside, those who once thought they knew who deserved which seat began to relearn the first lesson of aviation. Not everyone in the back compartment is shorter. The metal clanged softly as the plane stabilized. The vibrations died down, leaving only the faint sound of the engines and the sighs of relief from the 100-plus people in the cabin. The tense faces turned to shock, then silence. Someone clapped, sporadically but sincerely. The clapping spread, a reflex of gratitude to the woman who had just saved them, even though they had no idea who she was. Dr. Maya Coleman remained standing in the aisle, her voice low, clear, without a tremor. "There is no danger. This plane is designed to withstand 3 times the force of that vibration. Take a deep breath, count to 5, and then exhale slowly." A few passengers followed suit. A steady breathing sound spread through the cabin. The panic receded, giving way to a new order, an order that came from someone they hadn't even noticed a few minutes before. Daniel looked at her, almost holding his breath. He knew he was witnessing the moment an invisible system of power cracked not with anger, but with the quiet presence of real power. From the rear compartment, Gloria Harris ran up, her soft leather shoes making a light click on the floor. "Maya," she said softly, her breath still ragged. "I just called the captain. He's checking again and says the readings match the old radar error." Maya nodded slightly, her eyes still turned towards the cockpit. "Tell him. I'm Dr. Maya Coleman, CEO of Sky Vector Systems, and the safety system you're about to sign up for is what just saved this plane." Gloria stood still for a few seconds. She knew the name. The whole airline industry knew it. Then she turned and ran forward, as if afraid of missing the historic moment. In the cockpit, Captain Edward Shaw stared at the controls in amazement. Everything Maya had said about the secondary sensors, about radar jamming, about manual mode was spot on. He looked up when Gloria entered. "Captain Shaw," she said firmly. "She told me to tell her she's Dr. Maya Coleman, CEO of Sky Vector Systems." The whole cockpit fell silent. A young co-pilot muttered, "Wait, is she the one supplying the new system to our company?" Shaw swallowed, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. A mixture of shame and admiration rose in his chest. The man he thought was just a passenger had just saved him from a needless emergency landing that could have gotten him grounded. Maya returned to her seat and sat down. Daniel looked at her, his voice soft but full of admiration. "Do you know what they are saying up there?" "No need," she replied softly. "I just need them to understand." Her eyes stopped at first class, where Brooke Sanders stood, her eyes wide open, staring down at the back of the plane where the woman she had forced into seat 21B had just made the entire system tilt. In that moment, the power shifted. No one gave orders, no one argued. But the old order, where prejudice sat first and intelligence was relegated to the back, had collapsed completely. Gloria turned back, a slight smile as a thank you on behalf of hundreds of people. "He wants to see you after he lands." Maya just nodded. "I will meet, but not to hear any apologies," Daniel asked softly. "So what for?" "To talk business and justice." The light softened as the plane left the gray clouds. Through the window, the sky opened up to blue again, and Seattle appeared under a silvery mist. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind and light wash away her fatigue. She thought of her father, who had once said, "Justice is not about winning. It is about keeping your dignity, even when others lose theirs." Now she understood. Justice did not need a drumbeat. It only needed a moment of silence to let the truth ring. Brooke walked lightly over, stood near Maya, her voice trembling as, I don't know." Maya opened her eyes, looked straight at her, her eyes calm as a lake after a storm. "You don't have to say anything. I'm not angry, but I hope the next time you see someone who doesn't look like you sitting in the front row, you won't wonder if they deserve to be there." Brooke bowed her head, tears welling up in her eyes. Not because she was being scolded, but because for the first time in her life she realized she had lived too long in a system that thought it was just following procedure. Daniel was silent. He opened his phone and jotted down a few quick notes in the Notes app not to post, just to remember. "She doesn't get angry. She teaches them how to see." The loudspeaker announcement rang out. This time, warmer, ladies and gentlemen. We're now preparing to land at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The ground temperature is 17 degrees Celsius. Thank you for flying with Continental Star Airlines. That word, thank you, has a completely different meaning for the people in the cabin today. As the plane tilted slightly to approach the runway, Daniel looked at Maya, his voice soft. "Do you think they will keep their promise?" Maya looked out the window, her smile as thin as a bright thread. "It wasn't their promise that brought me to Seattle. It was their signature on the contract." He laughed. "And they'll probably sign faster than ever." "Maybe, because this time they didn't sign with a supplier. They signed with their own conscience." In the cockpit, Captain Shaw looked down at the control panel, where the last warning message had just disappeared. He spoke quietly over the intercom. "Brooke, when you land, ask Dr. Coleman to come out first. I want to thank her personally." Brooke replied in a small voice. "Yes, sir." Daniel leaned slightly toward Maya. "A lot of people will know about this." "I know," Maya said, her voice low but steady, "but they won't remember me for saving the flight. They'll remember me for keeping quiet." The plane broke through the last of the clouds, revealing Seattle in the pale yellow light of late morning. The buildings reflected the sun like 1,000 mirrors, and in a small compartment at the back, the black woman who had been deemed unfit for first class sat quietly, waiting for her moment of justice to strike. The plane's wheels hit the runway with a soft, metallic groan after a storm. Passengers in the cabin applauded, a classic American habit at the safe end of a flight. But today, the clapping sounded different, like an unconscious thank you to the woman in row 21B. Dr. Maya Coleman unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up slowly. She looked around. Everyone was staring at her, not with curiosity, but with respect. Even Brooke, who had forced her out of first class, couldn't look her in the eye. She nodded slightly at Gloria, a look of thanks, then picked up her small leather bag and calmly walked up the aisle. Beside her, Daniel Park said softly, "Do you want me to reshoot this scene?" "No need. Some moments should not be recorded. They should be remembered." He nodded and closed the phone. The plane door opened. The Seattle light poured in, white, cold, and pure. Just outside the landing gear, Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Continental Star Airlines CSA, was waiting with his PR team and a few contract managers. They held up signs, smiled broadly, and prepared to take pictures of the historic partnership moment. The flight crew stood at attention, bowing to each first-class passenger leaving the plane. The man who had been sitting in seat 2A, the seat that had belonged to Maya, was one of the first to disembark. He adjusted his suit jacket and smiled at Brooke as he passed, unaware that he had just become a small part of the airline's biggest mistake. Captain Edward Shaw stood by the door, trying to look calm, but sweat still beaded on his temples. Colin and Brooke stood behind him, pale-faced, trying to avoid Maya's eyes as she approached. The flight crew didn't understand at all, but they knew she was no ordinary passenger. Pierce peered through the tunnel, squinting. He saw a tall, dark-skinned woman in a gray suit exit last. Behind her, several other passengers were stepping aside, as if to make way for someone heavier. He smiled, thinking it was just a coincidence, until Maya stopped, right in front of him. Her voice was deep and even, not high, not low, but enough for the whole area to hear. "Mr. Pierce, I believe you're waiting for me." Pierce paused, the smile on his lips frozen. "Excuse me, who are you?" "I am Dr. Maya Coleman, CEO of Sky Vector Systems." The atmosphere changed instantly. The PR team stopped laughing. A camera was lowered, the flash still on. Maya continued, each word clear, without a tremor. And your flight crew, Brooke Sanders, Colin Miller, Captain Edward Shaw, just forced me out of my first-class seat because they didn't think I deserved to be there." Pierce opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face was pale, and he glanced around, looking for someone to explain. Brooke stood frozen. Colin bowed his head, and Captain Shaw stared straight at the floor. In the tube, a few passengers stopped, reluctant to go on. They knew they were witnessing something rare, justice, in the simple form of a black woman, standing upright, not shouting, not needing anyone to defend her. Maya gently handed Pierce a piece of paper, a photocopy of her boarding pass, still containing the QR code for Seat 2A. "I believe you remember the $300 million contract between Sky Vector Systems and Continental Star Airlines. That's why I flew to Seattle today." Pierce took the paper, his hand shaking slightly. "Dr. Coleman, I didn't know this was happening. It must be a misunderstanding. I don't think so. Mr. Pierce." Maya interrupted, her voice not at all high. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is culture. Silence." The sentence dropped like a stone thrown into a still lake. No one said anything. Gloria walked over, a small notebook in her hand. "Ma'am, I have the time record and testimony. If you need it." Maya nodded. "Hold it. Gloria, I don't need testimony. I have the truth." Pierce swallowed. He turned back to signal the PR manager. The woman immediately bowed her head, not daring to say another word. "Dr. Coleman," Pierce said, trying to keep his voice low, "can we go into the VIP room and talk privately?" "No," Maya said curtly. "I want to say it here, among all the people who saw me pushed into economy. They deserve to hear the whole thing." The row of tubes was dead silent. Daniel, standing at a distance, opened his notebook, his eyes following every little movement. Pierce took a deep breath, trying to save his last dignity. "I'm so sorry. Dr. Coleman, this is unprecedented in the firm. Oh, it happened." She interrupted, her voice soft but firm, and it might have happened 100 times to others, except they didn't have the power to make you stand here. Pierce bowed his head. A drop of sweat fell onto the shiny ground of the airport. Maya turned around, her eyes on the flight crew behind. "I don't need your apologies, but I want you to understand, this prejudice doesn't kill anyone with your hands, but it erodes their dignity little by little, until one day the system has no room for dignity anymore." No one said a word. Brooke sobbed softly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Colin stood still, his lips moving but unable to make a sound. Maya turned back to Pierce, her voice slow. "I'm not canceling the contract, but I'm going to call a meeting right here in 9 minutes with the entire flight crew, the head of customer service, and the diversity director. If I don't see them in 9 minutes, we'll review the terms of the partnership." Pierce just nodded. He knew that meeting would decide more than just the contract. It would decide the reputation of Continental Star Airlines. Maya looked around, her eyes landing on the passengers still standing in the distance. She nodded slightly, a small gesture, but enough to elicit a few nods in return. "Thank you for witnessing. Sometimes the only fairness we get is to see the truth with our own eyes." She turned away and walked towards the conference room beside the gate, her steps even and straight. The air behind her was still frozen. Only the rhythmic sound of her shoes on the floor could be heard, the rhythm of the silence that spoke. Daniel whispered to Gloria as they both watched Maya's figure. "Have you ever seen justice served like this?" "Not yet," Gloria replied, her eyes following Maya's figure. Justice usually comes with the sound of a hammer, but this time it comes with the footsteps of a woman. The air in the gate area was strangely quiet. The passengers had left, but the silence still lingered like the dust of a storm that had just passed, yet to dissipate. Dr. Maya Coleman stood before Jonathan Pierce, the light reflecting off the CEO badge on her chest, making it difficult for him to look straight. Pierce took a deep breath, trying to regain his familiar, powerful voice. "Dr. Coleman, if you'll excuse us, we can move to the VIP room." Maya interrupted, softly but firmly. "No, we'll meet in the room next to the gate. You have 9 minutes to gather the entire flight crew, the head of customer service, and the diversity officer." Pierce paused. 9 minutes. A number so small it seemed like it wouldn't change anything, but he understood. With this woman, it could change an airline. Minutes later, the small conference room next to gate D17, normally reserved for staff only, became the epicenter. A long wooden table, cool white fluorescent lights, a few hastily arranged chairs. Pierce sat at the head of the table with Captain Edward Shaw, Brooke Sanders, and Colin Miller on his right. Gloria and Daniel Park sat behind as witnesses. Maya didn't need any paperwork. She just opened her laptop and set it on the table. The screen illuminated her face, calm, unruffled, uncompromising. "Before we begin," Maya said, her voice soft as if she were presenting facts, "I want to remind you, this is not a revenge. This is a test of the ethics of an organization." Pierce nodded, his lips dry. Maya pressed play. On the screen appeared a video Daniel filmed on the plane. Scene where Brooke asks Maya to leave her first-class seat. Colin checked his ticket 3 times, then nodded slightly to the captain. And finally, a scene of a white businessman arriving late, being greeted with a smile and ushered straight to seat 2A. No commentary, just images, and the sound of the plane engines beating like the heartbeat of reality. Pierce leaned back in his chair, his face pale. Shaw looked down, his hands clasped together until they were white. Brooke cried silently. Colin swallowed. Maya opened the email Gloria had sent, an internal CSA chain letter where flight attendants complained about customer discrimination, but never got a response. The last line of the email was what made the room hold its breath. "I'm retiring soon. I have nothing to lose, but if this company doesn't change, one day the person you insult will be the one holding your career in your hands." Gloria sat silently, eyes down at the table, not speaking. Maya Key sang "Daniel." "Do you have any proof?" Daniel nodded, turned on the recorder. "I confirm. I am Daniel Park, reporter for Tech Horizons magazine. I sat in seat 21A and witnessed the entire incident, including the discrimination, double-checking, and intentional downgrading of passenger seats." He stopped, looked around, his voice low but clear. None of them knew she was the CEO. They only saw the color of her skin. Pierce raised his hand to his forehead, as if trying to push back the pain spreading across his temples. Maya didn't say anything more, just opened another short file. The airplane drink service scene. Brooke walked past Maya's row without stopping, while at the same time, the 2 seats in front, both occupied by white passengers, were poured drinks and asked questions attentively. At this point, no further explanation is needed. Everyone understands. Maya closed her laptop, her voice still calm, but each word was like a needle touching the glossy paint of power. This is not an isolated incident. This is a culture that allows people to believe they have the right to judge others based on their first glance. She stopped, looking straight at Pierce. And that culture is permeating into the mechanics of his company. Pierce bowed his head and was silent for a long time. Then he stood up and spoke slowly, his voice hoarse. "I have no excuse. Dr. Coleman, on behalf of the firm, I apologize, and I promise this will not be swept under the rug." He turned to the crew captain Shaw, Brooks Sanders, Colin Miller. "You are all suspended immediately, pending termination. I will sign the administrative leave pending termination on the spot." No one responded. Brooke burst into tears. Colin trembled, and Shaw just nodded, a small nod of acceptance. Maya was neither happy nor gloating. She looked at them, her eyes sad, like someone who once believed the system could be better. "I don't hate you. I just feel sorry for the people who will learn to treat you." Pierce nodded and said softly, "We will launch an internal investigation. And if you agree, I would like to invite you to participate in the company's diversity mentoring program." Maya smiled softly, not a sarcastic smile. "Just a tired one, I'll think about it. But the first thing you need to do is apologize to Gloria. She's expressing something I just experienced today." Gloria raised her head slightly, tears welling up in her eyes. Pierce walked over and bowed his head slightly. "Thank you, Gloria. We have forgotten the voices of the silent ones." Daniel turned off the recorder. He looked at Maya and whispered, "You just transformed this entire room." 9 minutes, Maya replied, her voice as light as the wind. "Sometimes 9 minutes is enough to fix a flight, and also enough to fix a mind." When the meeting ended, Maya put away her laptop and stood up. Pierce followed, his voice earnest. "I hope this incident doesn't cause you to cancel your contract." She stopped at the door, turned to look at him. "No, I won't cancel, because I don't punish what can be fixed, but I will monitor every step you take next." Then she turned away, her voice lower. "Justice isn't about putting people out of work. It's about waking them up. Outside." The airport corridor was filled with the sound of loudspeakers as passengers prepared to board. Daniel and Gloria walked out behind Maya, watching her silhouette in the late afternoon light. Gloria said softly, her voice hoarse with emotion, "I've been in this industry for 35 years, and I've never seen anyone shut up a company by saying so little." Daniel nodded. She need not shout. The whole world will speak for her. The conference room was so quiet you could hear the clock on the wall ticking away. Jonathan Pierce sat there, shoulders hunched, hands clasped in front of him as if trying to hide the embarrassment of someone who had just been ousted from a position of power. Dr. Maya Coleman stood by the small window, looking out onto the runway. A CSA plane was preparing to take off, shiny, perfect, and cold just the way the system had always worked. She turned back, her voice soft but decisive. "I don't need a free ticket. I need system security." Pierce looked up, slightly startled. The statement was simple, yet it carried the weight of philosophy. System guarantee. What does that mean? "Dr. Coleman, what I want is not an apology, but a mechanism so that people like me don't need a CEO to be treated like human beings." Pierce was silent. He understood that this was not just about a flight, but a judgment on the very culture his company helped maintain. Maya pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. She opened her notebook and put pen to paper. If SkyVector still signs a contract with Continental Star Airlines, I will need 5 conditions: clear, transparent, and non-negotiable. Pierce motioned for the secretary beside him to take notes. The atmosphere in the room changed. No longer the CEO of a company negotiating, but students listening to a lesson in how to live a good life. Maya listed each thing, her voice slow, not high but enough to engrave each word first. Take clear disciplinary action against the discriminatory flight crew, not to set an example, but to show that the company takes responsibility. Pierce nodded, his eyes turning to the corner of the room where Brooke, Colin, and Edward Shaw were still sitting quietly, awaiting the verdict. Second, the entire CSA system must be trained in anti-bias and anti-profiling, not some mindless e-learning video, but direct mandatory training for every customer-facing employee. We have an annual training program, Maya interrupted. Not harshly, but directly. If that program had worked, I wouldn't be sitting here today. Pierce bowed his head. Third, she continued, reopen internal complaint channels for employees and customers. Transparent, trackable, and not buried under layers of review. A system is only as strong as the weakest person in it. Gloria nodded slightly. For the first time during the meeting, she saw a real glimmer of hope in her eyes, a light she thought had gone out after 35 years of service in the skies. Fourth, change the hiring and promotion process. I want to see more people like Gloria, not just in the passenger cabin, but in the bridge, at the control desk, and in training. They don't need to be blessed. They need to be seen. The room fell silent. Daniel, who was taking notes at the end of the table, couldn't help but smile slightly. It was the kind of condition that newspapers couldn't write about, but could change a generation of workers. And finally, Maya paused, her eyes fixed on Pierce. CSA will make financial contributions to anti-transportation organizations, not just a PR donation. I want a long-term commitment, with reports, with results. Pierce exhaled, his voice low. You want me to sign these conditions? No. Maya smiled faintly. I want you to believe them. Signing is the easy part. Across the table, Brooke looked up, eyes wet. I'm sorry, Dr. Coleman. I don't know what else to say. Maya looked at her, her eyes no longer hard. Only tiredness and sadness, I believe you. But remember, sorry doesn't erase actions. How you live after today will be the answer. Colin bowed his head. Captain Shaw stood up, his voice hoarse. I let it happen on my shift. I take responsibility. Just want you to know. I will never make this mistake again. Maya nodded. If that is true, then today is not just the end of your work. It is the beginning of a new work, being a good person. Pierce leaned back in his chair and looked at the 5 conditions. He knew that accepting them would mean the end of the old management style, but refusing would mean losing a $300 million contract and the reputation of the company. After a few seconds, he picked up the pen and signed his name. As the ink touched the paper, Maya said softly, Good. Now we can start again. Not from zero, but from equity. The words silenced the room, but this time the silence wasn't out of fear. It was out of respect. Daniel stood up and approached Maya. Do you know what the biggest lesson today is? What is that? Calmness is more powerful than power? Maya smiled softly, her voice gentle. No, it's when the powerful use their calmness to protect those without power. Pierce stood up and held out his hand. Dr. Coleman, Thank you. You just helped me look at my company and myself." Maya shook his hand, but did not squeeze hard. "I hope the next time we meet, I will be just a partner, not a mirror reflecting your mistakes." The door opened. Light from outside flooded in. Gloria walked beside Maya and whispered, "Thank you, Maya. I think not only they were awakened today, but me too. You deserved that. Thank you years ago." "Gloria," Maya replied. Daniel walked behind, silently jotting down the headline for his upcoming article, "The 9 Minutes That Rocked an Airline." And one woman taught the world that kindness doesn't require permission. Outside, through the large window, another CSA plane was leaving the runway. Maya stopped to look at it, saying softly as if to herself, "Sometimes, to fly higher, we must dare to come down once, to repair our wings." 3 months have passed since that fateful meeting at the Seattle airport. Autumn has arrived. The American sky is clearer. Migratory birds draw soft curves on the blue background. As for Dr. Maya Coleman, she still maintains her composure as ever, the woman who makes the entire aviation industry look back at herself. This year's International Aviation Summit was held in Chicago. A large stage, soft white lighting, hundreds of airline executives, safety experts, and aviation media were present. This year's theme, Rebuilding Trust in the Sky. Maya walked onto the stage to a soft but sustained applause. In the front row, Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Continental Star Airlines, sat silently. His eyes different from the day she first met him. No more pride, only gratitude and respect. Next to Pierce is Gloria Harris, now officially head of passenger advocacy at CSA. Her new uniform fits well, the silver collar reflecting the light, a symbol of her career and honesty. Maya adjusted the microphone, smiling softly. 3 months ago, I sat in row 21B on what seemed like an ordinary flight, but it became a mirror of how we judge people, not by their abilities, but by their prejudices. The room fell silent. The men who had once run international fleets sat bolt upright, hanging on every word. I didn't come here today to rehash old stories. I came here to talk about something the aviation industry seems to have forgotten. Safety is about more than just the machines. Safety is about not excluding competent people because of their skin color, their accent, or their background. Her voice was low and even, without a hint of tension. But each word fell as firmly as a landing gear hitting the runway. I have seen radar systems that can save planes from hurricanes, but no system can save an organization whose people believe that power is the right to look down on others. In the front row, Pierce bowed his head slightly. He had been a defender of old culture. Now he sat there, silent, as if to prove Maya's point. After the speech, the host stepped up and introduced the special section today. Continental Star Airlines is announcing a strategic partnership with SkyVector Systems, not only in technology, but also in organizational ethics. Pierce stood up, walked to the podium, and shook Maya's hand. He said, his voice as deep and sincere as ever, "I used to think safety was all about technology. But Dr. Coleman made me understand. It starts with how we look at people. Today, I don't just want to work with SkyVector, I want to learn from them." The applause was loud. Not loud, but thick, heavy, and sincere. Behind the scenes, Daniel Park was adjusting his camera. He had just finished a feature-length report called "The Flight That Changed an Industry." The article not only went viral, but was also included in the internal communications curriculum of many major companies. Daniel smiled as he saw Maya step off the plane. You did what hundreds of writers like me can only describe. No, Maya smiled lightly. I only said what needed to be said, and you made the whole world hear. Gloria walked over and gave Maya a glass of water. You know, last week I got 3 letters from new flight attendants. They said that because of that incident, they felt confident to speak up if they saw something wrong. 35 years ago, I never thought I would hear those words. Because you patiently kept the flame burning. Maya replied, I only helped it to burn. At the end of the conference, Maya and Pierce signed a new memorandum of understanding. The 5 conditions she had laid out were now part of CSA's public policy. Mandatory anti-bias training for all employees. Independently monitored transparent complaints channel. The proportion of black and female employees in management increased by 40%. The Fair Skies Initiative, funded by CSA, provides $5 million a year to organizations fighting discrimination in transportation. And on the last page, a small but meaningful line inspired by Dr. Maya Coleman, CEO of SkyVector Systems, for proving that dignity can change the altitude of an entire industry. That evening, at the airport lounge, Maya sat alone, looking out at the runway, where the red and white flashing lights were like the heartbeat of the modern world. Daniel sat down beside her, his voice soft. Are you tired? No, just peace. For the first time, I saw a plane landing not just on the ground, but on human conscience. They were silent. Outside, a CSA plane had just pulled off the runway, its new logo emblazoned on its fuselage fly fair, Fly Together. Gloria texted the first flight and under the new policy just took off. I was still the last one to close the cabin door. Same as before, but different. Maya read, smiling slightly. Before boarding her flight back to Dallas, Maya took out her boarding pass, seat 2A. She looked at that row, where it all began, where prejudice sat before truth stood. She whispered, as if talking to the past. It is not where you sit that makes you worthy. It is how you stand up after being pushed down that does. The afternoon at the Chicago airport was tinged with the pale gold of sunset. The orange clouds drifted slowly like the quiet thoughts in Dr. Maya Coleman's mind. She had just concluded a tumultuous 3 months in which one woman, with nothing but calmness and intelligence, made an entire industry reflect on herself. Maya was sitting in seat 2A, first class, on the flight back to Dallas. Yes, seat 2A, the same seat she'd been forced to leave 3 months earlier. But this time, things are different. Today's flight crew consisted of 5 people, an American Indian captain, a white flight attendant, an African American, an Asian, and a young Latino. All worked together smoothly and professionally, without a single suspicious look or hidden meaning. As the Asian stewardess, Sophia, bent down to place a glass of water in front of her, Maya smiled. Thank you, Sophia. Dr. Coleman, the girl replied, her voice full of pride. It is an honor to serve the man who inspired me to apply for a job here. Maya looked at her, her eyes shining with a rarely seen emotion. Thanks, but don't work for me. Work for yourself. That's the real meaning of change. The plane left the runway and glided into the clouds. The late afternoon sunlight reflected through the windows, casting a warm, golden glow on Maya's face. She opened her laptop and looked at the report's title, SkyVector X CSA Partnership Phase 2, Ethical Safety Implementation, On screen, a photo of Gloria smiling at the inauguration ceremony, standing next to Jonathan Pierce and the new CSA team. Below it was the caption, Gloria Harris, Head of Passenger Advocacy, 35 years in the industry, symbol of fairness in the sky. Maya sighed and said to herself, sometimes justice doesn't need trumpets or drums. It just takes one person to initiate it. The internal speaker rang out. The captain's voice was warm. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have Dr. Maya Coleman here today, who helped create Continental Star Airlines' Fly Fair program. Thank you for helping us fly better, not just in the air, but in the way we see people. The first-class audience applauded. Maya felt a little embarrassed, but nodded in thanks. She wasn't used to being praised, but this time it wasn't bitter. It was the result of real change. As the plane reached a steady cruising altitude, Maya leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. The sound of the engines faded into the distance, and images played over her mind like a slow-motion movie. 9 minutes in that airport conference room where she kept her voice so calm it made the powerful bow. 3 months of relentless work to turn a promise into policy, a scandal into reform. The warm voice resounded like a voiceover of memory. 9 minutes of courage to fire the entire crew. 3 months of determination to change the system. But the goal was never revenge. The goal was to make sure no one else had to go through this again. A little black girl sitting in the front row turned and smiled at Maya. She was wearing a CSA hoodie and was holding a toy airplane. Teacher, I want to grow up to be a pilot. Maya laughed and leaned over. So remember, don't let anyone tell you that you're not good enough just because of the color of your skin. I promise, the little girl said firmly. Maya gently placed her hand on the front seat shoulder. Her eyes gentle, as if she was sending her trust to the next generation. As the plane flew over the white clouds, Maya opened her notebook and wrote a few last lines for herself, or perhaps for anyone on a journey to regain dignity. The greatest power is not proving, I am worthy. Real power is setting the standard so that everyone is treated as worthy. She put down her pen and closed her notebook. Outside. The sun was setting behind the clouds, but the sky ahead was still bright. The captain's voice rang out again, preparing to land in Dallas. Thank you for flying with Continental Star Airlines. Maya looked out the window. The sunset was spreading like a silk ribbon across the sky. She smiled softly, the gentle smile of someone who had weathered a storm and still chosen to stand firm. Because, in the end, a person's greatest victory is not to make others lose, but to make the world understand that everyone deserves equal respect. The plane descended. Dallas appeared beneath its wings, glowing with night lights. A new chapter of justice, quiet but enduring, began right here in skies that had seen humiliation, now rewritten with kindness and wisdom. Dr. Maya Coleman. The story is more than just a case of racism. It's a powerful reminder of the power of intelligent responses. When we're offended, we have two choices: let our anger take over, or use our intelligence to change the rules of the game. Maya chose the latter, and it was her calm that brought an entire system to its knees. In life, we cannot avoid the moments of being looked down upon, doubted, or misjudged. But remember, how we react can define our whole life. Calmness is not weakness, but strength of a person who knows his or her own worth. She didn't just reclaim her first-class seat, she reestablished the standard of fairness for all who came after her. So, Maya's lesson is simple and profound. True power lies not in proving yourself better than others, but in creating a world where everyone is treated fairly. If you believe that every human being deserves respect, please leave a like. Share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel to spread more humane, inspiring, and empowering stories like this. Thank you for joining us. Now, let's continue Dr. Maya Coleman's journey